Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, President Trump telling Apple CEO Tim Cook to move iPhone production back home instead of to India.
Tim, look, we've treated you really good. We put up with all the plants that you built in China for years. Now you got to build us. We're not interested in you building in India.
AI Czar David Sacks attends President Trump's Saudi Arabia trip, speaking on how the U.S. can dominate the AI race against China. Walmart warns that it plans to raise prices on some items. Details on what products will or won't get high price tags. And Senator Ted Cruz calls to dismantle the Chinese regime's state-sponsored organ harvesting industry, which targets prisoners of faith. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Before we dive into today's news, make sure to use the link down below to subscribe to our newsletter. Each week we round up the highlights and controversies happening around China and the world, and share an exclusive behind-the-scenes snapshot with our readers. Keep an eye out. The newsletter will land in your inbox Friday morning. President Trump is taking aim at Apple, calling on CEO Tim Cook to stop building factories in India. On Thursday, the president criticized Apple's push to shift production out of China and into India, instead of bringing those jobs back to the U.S.
We're not interested in you building in India.
He says Apple should be making more iPhones at home, not overseas. Apple started moving some of its production out of China during the COVID-19 pandemic, when its largest plant there was hit hard by local lockdowns. India has been working to make India a key hub for U.S.-bound iPhones by 2026. It's part of the China Plus One strategy. The plan aims to make India's global supply chain more resilient as tensions rise between Washington and Beijing. Likewise, major Apple suppliers have been building new factories in India, but that could change. If Apple decides to move more production to the U.S., those expansion plans might get scrapped. In the past year, Apple's made $22 billion worth of iPhones in India, up nearly 60% from the year before. Trump's remarks came during the ongoing trade talks between the U.S. and India. Last month, the U.S. imposed a 26% reciprocal tariff rate on Indian imports. India's average trade-weighted tariff on U.S. imports stands at roughly 12%. Doubling down on his American first stance, President Trump is pressing for a zero tariff offer from India.
They've offered us a deal where basically they're willing to literally charge us no tariff.
Following President Trump's remarks, the Indian foreign minister told the media, quote, "Nothing is decided till everything is." Analysts say Trump's comments appear to be part of a strategy to pressure India into offering more favorable trade terms. Still, despite the tug-of-war talks, the two nations have been deepening their collaboration in artificial intelligence during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington in February, with the U.S.-India initiative on critical and emerging technologies to pushing forward joint efforts in AI, semiconductors, and quantum computing. The White House's AI Czar David Sacks went to Saudi Arabia with the president to discuss U.S.-China competition in AI. Sacks explained how many successful companies from Silicon Valley create ecosystems. They're environments where technology, talent, and partnerships work together to fuel growth and success. Take a look.
Every successful company in Silicon Valley gets to be that way by creating an ecosystem. In fact, they do that by creating a standard. They want everyone to build on top of them. In a similar way, the United States needs to encourage the world to build on our tech stack.
David Sacks also pointed to a Biden-era rule. It's since been lifted, but would have restricted American AI technology from being shared internationally, including with allies. Its original purpose was to prevent countries of concern like China from accessing it. But critics said it was too bureaucratic. Sacks argued that opening U.S. AI tech to the world is the best way to stay ahead of China. Shifting over to Tesla, Elon Musk's been pushing for a supply chain shift away from China. At the same time, Tesla's been feeling pressure from rising competition in China's electric vehicle market. China's EV giants like BYD are offering more variety at lower prices, and that's cutting into Tesla's sales potential in China's market. Tesla's Shanghai plant is still a major hub for the company, but the long-term strategy is about diversifying where its products are made. Musk is expanding Tesla's manufacturing and market reach worldwide, with Europe, particularly Germany, playing a growing role. Notably, Musk was one of the major tech CEOs who visited Saudi Arabia with President Trump. Meanwhile, CEOs from Amazon, Apple, Google, and Microsoft did not attend the trip. Price tags at Walmart will soon be going up. The retail giant is warning that it plans to raise prices on some items. The good news is most grocery products originate here in the United States and are not subject to higher tariffs. Walmart CEO says the scope of the tariffs won't allow the company to absorb all of the effects. In prepared remarks for the earnings call on Thursday, he said the retailer will do its best to keep prices as low as possible. The world's largest retailer says price hikes are likely to begin later this month. Every product entering the U.S. is subject to a 10% tariff. Most items from China face a 30% levy for the time being. Walmart CEO says over 2/3 of the products sold at Walmart are made, grown, or assembled in the United States. But most of the other items are sourced from China and Mexico. The tariff truce between the United States and China is helping to restart trade between the countries, but for manufacturers of Halloween decorations in eastern China's Yiwu City, feelings are mixed.
Halloween comes in October, but manufacturer Lo Xiaobo says the golden time to make spooky decorations in China starts in March, up until the end of September. This year, though, has seen US buyers of frightful decor scared into suspending or delaying their orders. Last month, President Donald Trump's tariffs on Chinese imports hit 145%. That means, for people like Lo, October 31st could be all trick and no treat. His family has made Halloween decorations in the eastern Chinese city of Yiwu for 28 years. And while a 90-day pause in the US-China trade war means tariffs have gone from sky high to 30%, for Lo, the damage has already been done.
I don't think just because they lowered tariffs that we should be happy, because they have already delayed our production time. For example, in a normal quarter, let's say these 2 months, I can produce about $69,000 worth of goods. But now I only have $28,000.
Lowe's business relies on the US for a fifth of its sales.
Lowe said the 3 months tariff truce is not long enough for his business to take new orders, complete them, and ship them to the US. An American family-owned toy-making business and a supplier to Walmart says it's struggling to navigate President Donald Trump's tariffs on Chinese imports. The company has factories in China, where it's laying off more than 200 workers due to financial strain. In the U.S., its 15 employees might soon feel the impacts too.
Around 4 decades ago, David and Jason Chung's father fled communist China and resettled in California, starting a toy business that has stayed in the family. His sons built up the business over the decades as Hunter Company Inc., and now they sell toys to U.S. mega retailers Walmart and Target. U.S. and Chinese officials in Geneva said Monday they had agreed to cool trade tensions, reaching a deal to pause tariffs for 90 days and to drastically reduce levies on Chinese goods. But for the Chung's family business, the trade war had already taken its toll, and they have significantly cut the number of staff at the southern China factory that builds their toys.
We have reduced staff by 50%, so we've gone from 400 workers to 200 workers. We will be looking at additional layoffs in another month's time. We've stopped all business development as far as product development and upgrading our facilities here, which we had been in the middle of coming into 2025. And any plans for expansion right now are on hold.
The Chung's father opened the factory 35 years ago as Beijing was opening up China's economy. The Chungs also employ 15 people in California. They too would lose their jobs if Hunter fails. Trump has said tariffs will incentivize companies to reshore manufacturing, or at least drive it out of China. Hunter illustrates why economists say that's unlikely. There are not enough people with toy-making expertise elsewhere. The machinery they need is hard to move and would cost millions to replace. And most critically, there's no time to solve these problems before Hunter runs out of money.
Coming up, a spotlight on human rights in China. Senator Ted Cruz calls to dismantle the Chinese regime's state-sponsored organ harvesting industry, which targets prisoners of faith. A major push to cut dependence on China for critical medicines. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. labels it a priority for him and the Trump administration. And in America's backyard, the Chinese Communist Party funds a $9 billion line of credit and fresh infrastructure investment for Latin America and the Caribbean. We speak with Marcus Chagas, editor-in-chief of the Epoch Times Brazil, about it in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Senator Ted Cruz is criticizing the Chinese Communist Party for its ongoing human rights abuses, especially forced organ harvesting. Cruz wrote on X this week that China's persecution of Falun Gong practitioners, the main target of the crime, is an attack on religious freedom and human rights. He called for dismantling the state-sponsored organ harvesting industry of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party's organ harvesting operations function as a business by killing off healthy prisoners and selling their organs for profit. Many of these prisoners are practitioners of spiritual meditation practice Falun Gong, imprisoned for their faith. In 2019, the China Tribunal in London concluded that the Chinese regime had been forcibly harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience for years on a substantial scale. Falun Gong practitioners were listed as the principal source of human organs. Congressman Chris Smith, who sponsored the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act, worked over the years to raise awareness of the problem.
An absolutely ugly truth being committed right now as we meet by Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. They are murdering tens of thousands of young people, Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, and some others, in order to steal their organs.
Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is a spiritual practice made of slow-moving meditative exercises and 3 guiding principles: truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Before the Chinese regime began persecuting it in 1999, an estimated 100 million people were practicing Falun Gong. That number exceeded the members of the Chinese Communist Party, and the authoritarian regime could not tolerate a group larger than itself. It also feared that the practice would inspire faith and free thinking in Chinese citizens, values that run contrary to communist ideology. It soon launched a nationwide campaign to eliminate it, which continues today. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says that reducing dependency on China for critical medicines is a priority for him and the Trump administration. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more from Kennedy's testimony on Wednesday on Capitol Hill.
They're directly and narrowly focused on creating dominance across the globe.
During a House committee meeting, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. agreed when asked if over-relying on China for critical pharmaceuticals poses a threat.
We saw the problem with supply chain control by the Chinese during COVID, and this is a priority for me and for this administration.
RFK Jr. says that they've been working hard to bring more medicine production into the U.S. and that he's been meeting with pharmaceutical CEOs.
I've met repeatedly with Eli Lilly, which is now building 9 facilities, 9 factories in this country.
Kennedy says that China also has a program called the 1,000 Talents Program that is designed to steal U.S. IP and technology.
And we have facilitated that at NIH by funding Chinese scientists with contracts that don't require them even to report their science back to our country, but they give it directly to Chinese military scientists on bioweapons research that we gave them the technology for.
Secretary Kennedy also brought up his plan to onshore more critical medicine production while at his hearing with the Senate. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
China is looking to expand its influence in Latin America and the Caribbean. Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping said this week that China will offer $9 billion in credit to countries there. Xi was speaking in Beijing to delegates from over 30 Latin American nations. To discuss Beijing's influence in the region, NTD's Carrie Dunst was joined by Marcus Chagas, editor-in-chief with the Epoch Times Brazil.
Marcos, thank you so much for joining us this morning. How would you compare the sphere of influence of Washington versus Beijing in Latin America?
Okay, so from the 2010s onward, we've really seen Beijing overtake Washington as the main trading partner of most countries in South America And I mean, even in Latin America, excluding Mexico. So Beijing's influence is ongoing, it's growing. It's also growing militarily and in other areas. And even when we see now President Trump's visit to the Middle East, those are two very key regions which are seeing a lot of geopolitical movement right now. When we see so many Latin American leaders uniting in Beijing, that's also the celebration of the 10 years of what they call the CELAC China Forum. And the CELAC is the community of Latin American and Caribbean states. And really, this organization is very similar to the Organization of American States, but you get Canada out, the US out, until you establish a forum with China. So it's also a big tool for leverage. And Lula from Brazil is also on a state visit to Beijing, which has big implications on all of that.
Marcos, in terms of the influence, how much does $9 billion in credit to these community of Latin America and Caribbean countries, how much does that get Beijing?
Okay, so it's not really about the amount of money, the way I see it, but about the manner in which the money is landed. So if we go back to studies from the A-Data Lab at William and Mary University, we're talking about predatory loaning, debt trap diplomacy, which we've seen in Latin America before. So just to give you an example, in Argentina, there's a space base run by the People's Liberation Army, which is the armed forces of the People's Republic of China. This space base, it was found on a previous Argentine administration, couldn't be accessed by local authorities without China's permission. They tried to review the status of the security clearances, and what they found was that due to debt trap diplomacy, they couldn't change the terms on that without changing the terms of all loans coming from China to Argentina. And that's a common practice according to studies that track China's loans to third world countries. So 9 billion, yes, I mean, it's a lot, especially for developing countries, but I'm more concerned about the manner in which the loans are made than the amount itself, and this just gives us a broad picture of how China has been acting in the region. We've seen that in Ecuador as well, and in Venezuela too.
So it's the terms of the loan more than the amount. Interesting distinction there. Now, President Trump singled out the need to take back influence in the Panama Canal. That was part of what he ran on. How effective was Secretary of State Rubio in this endeavor, and what was Beijing's response to the Panama Canal?
So that's a great question, and I think it's very interesting when we talk about Marco Rubio. Of course, his parents are survivors from the Cuban communist regime in Latin America, which is the most murderous regime in Latin America's history, over 100,000 people killed. And he understands very well the political balance in Latin America. He speaks Spanish fluently. Even in the previous Trump administration, when Mike Pompeo was outgoing from the State Department, I think they had gotten a new grasp of what Latin America was about and what China's influence in Latin America was about. And I think even the choice of Marco Rubio as head of State Department, as Secretary of State, had a lot to do with that. Regarding the Panama Canal, I think there have been efforts to push for less Chinese influence there, and there was and is a lot of Chinese influence, but currently that's on hold, and I think the US and China will probably iron out the terms of trade deals before going back to talking about the Panama Canal. Currently, U.S. firms are trying to acquire ports in the Panama Canal from Chinese companies, but the deals are basically being blocked by regulatory agencies in Beijing. So we'll see how that plays out. But inroads have definitely been made, and I think public attention drawn to this matter has also had a big impact on China's influence in the region.
And Marcus, what is the current situation in Venezuela, where observers say Nicolas Maduro improperly assumed victory in the most recent election? And how central is China's support to Maduro to stay in power?
I mean, it's absolutely central, and it's also interesting when we talk about China's interest in Latin America. If we go back to the Cold War or think about this in Cold War terms, and in many aspects, there's content to suggest that the Chinese do. Venezuela is really a rogue regime. I mean, it's a socialist dictatorship, which has been, its leaders have been accused by the DOJ of a narco-terrorism operation to, quote-unquote, flood the U.S. with cocaine. And I mean, China has played a big role in allowing the Maduro regime to continue, be it supplying them with military aid or policing gear, huge loans that are then paid out in crude oil. And even now, while the CELAC, the community of Latin American Caribbean states, is uniting with China in Beijing, what we see is a scandal published by Reuters, where Venezuela is changing the label of ships transporting oil to China from Venezuela to Brazil. They're like basically defrauding the documentation and trying to make it look as if the ships are coming out of Brazil, so as to defraud U.S. sanctions, and basically not get caught up in secondary sanctions. So China has been key to all of this, and Venezuela has been paying back with oil support and basically asymmetrical warfare against the United States. It's very crucial that we talk about this also in light of the loans, because Venezuela is the country with the most debt to China. And when we talk about loans and the terms of the loans, that also plays a big role in how China is able to influence local politics.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.